All right.
Um, just to get, yeah, okay. Hopefully that was insightful at least a little bit,
So this is
or
what
just
this is
into
kind
my
of what
mind.
is this kind of what you're grasping from the like this is the important pieces that you extracted from the whatever 10 or so 12 pages that we had to do.
I think there were some things outside of it that I have notation on, right? The mathematics, but that was what my brain hooked into. I assume you have things that your brain hooked into that are different that
Yeah.
are valuable.
No. This is the majority of it. I mean, there's like a little bit before and after this, but this is the meat of what he's talking about. I mean, the meat of is that which is how is pure natural science possible, which is the main. I mean, that's the question he's going to. But then the important part of what he's talking about is actually the difference between judgments of perception, the judgments of experience, what makes something objective and what makes it subjective. Which the notion of objective is really, well, it's a little bit annoying because like I'm just gonna go ahead and say what I had to kind of figure out, which is that
Do it.
objective doesn't always imply true. Objective just means that you're talking about things that are objects. Because I can make an quote unquote objective statement that is false, which is that, for example, the sunshine cools the rock. Okay? I mean, sure, there's some circumstances in which that might make sense, but
But if I were to say objectively that is incorrect,
I think that's
I think you were using the word objective to mean different things. There's an
yes.
object, and then there is the object, or there's an object. There is an objective statement, meaning a statement that is not of the subject, meaning to say something subjectively. You to say an objective statement is already subjective.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so it does. Yes, so it does come across a slight problem where, I guess, a conflation, which is
And usually, an
objective.
objective statement is going to be something of a group, like a group
Yeah,
consensus,
like
almost.
everybody agrees on this. It's objective. I mean, I think the difference has to do with is the what is the referent of the statements in your judgment. So the judgment of perception, said something like, well, if the sun is beating down, then the rock is warm. And all you're doing in that is you're connecting two different perceptions, which is that says I see the sun beating down, and I see that the rock is warm. And there's a little bit more to that, which is saying that, like, well, given the one, then I see the other. But I'm not actually saying anything about the relationship between the sun and the rock. I'm saying a relationship between this particular sensation and this other particular sensation. When it starts becoming objective, is when I'm talking about the objects themselves, not about my sensations, but about the object themselves, which is to say that there's a particular relation between the sunlight and the rock.
Meaning that okay, I see what you're saying. That saying the sun makes the rock warm is a reductive statement, or if we were to take it as objective, it is truly a reductive statement about how sun rays heat the earth
Yeah,
down to
it's
like there's so
objective.
much it's cashed out from a, if it were to be objective, it's cashed out from a larger presupposition that the sun is something that through waves of radiation heats the earth and the rock is on the earth. There's a lot there.
Yeah, yeah, because we're talking about the objects themselves, and we're not talking about me as a subject per se. Uh, and what I was trying to do was, well, my problem, kind of my, I guess, gripe reading some of this is he never talks, so far at least, he's never talked about false judgments. So you could definitely have objectively false judgments, such as that the sunshine cools the rocks.
if I were if I were to be reductive to try and bridge the gap where you're at, is it kind of that to take it enough steps back where in the way that he is trying to take steps back away from and break down the way we view the world, he should say almost there is no objective statement. Everything technically, there's a stupid statement I think that like data is just the plurality of anecdote, right? Or something
No,
stupid
no, no,
like that.
no. He definitely wants to say that we have objective statements. It's just what does it make something? What is an objective statement or judgment? So the statement is what is said, and the judgment is how you're saying it, or what brought you to saying it that way. And so, on the one hand, an objective.
Empirical intuitions in themselves cannot be generalized. That kind of judgments of perception are particular and
Well, yeah.
subjective.
Empirical intuitions in themselves cannot be generalized because to be generalized requires a concept of of pure understanding. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Um, so, yeah, but I guess because obviously he says people have said things that well, like because what would it mean for something to be objectively false if because objectively false is still objective, it's just that it's false, and I don't know, just going through it, like, I kind of had to like infer that because I can say on the one hand that it's an objective statement to say that the sun warms the rock, but it's similarly objective to say that the sun doesn't warm the rock. It's just that you're negating one, and then one of those is true and one of those is false, but they're both objective.
There's
Now,
a lot of yeah.
well, and I guess the other piece of the being objective is that anybody who is seeing this would see the same thing. Whereas in perception, when I'm stating things
in my perceptions.
in my perceptions, as perception, I'm saying I'm standing here and I'm seeing this, and that doesn't imply that anybody standing here sees these same things. All I'm saying is that in this particular, I am seeing these things. Whereas once I start talking about objectives, or once I start talking objectively, I'm talking about anybody who would be seeing this thing because it is the objects that are causing these sensations in my head.
Well, we could never say that. That last part.
Truly, like well, we can say them, but whether we're saying them truly or falsely.
Yeah, it would never. We can. That could never be an always true statement,
No,
right? Because the subject can interpret.
You can make those statements, and I think he does eventually imply that they can be. I think subtextually he's saying. That
Oh yeah, sorry. Away from him, right? We as us two could.
Okay.
We could never say that, but I would say not referencing his judgment.
So here I'm gonna throw you a doozy.
Hit
So
me.
that statement in and of itself is a way of saying that anybody who at any time would say that if they're standing in a certain place, nobody else can see them, which is to say that it is all people at all times, would never be able to say that. So
You cut out. Say that. You cut out. Say that again.
I'm gonna do a terrible job of saying this. So hypothetically we just said that nobody at any point would be able to say that, given these perceptions, I can infer this objective judgment. That itself is an objective judgment, which is to say that, or not objective, but that it applies universally.
Restate. Start over.
Well, it is objective in that it applies universally necessarily. So it's self-refuting. So
Okay. So yeah. So I would say, in one sense, we could never say an objective statement, but to move through the world, we do have to have conversations about, like, there's like the colloquial objective, subjective. But if we were to go Kantian and we're breaking down self-consciousness and fucking facts of the world, yeah, in a way, we could never have an objective statement, right? Like, I think that those are two different ways to use a word, right? And in context, we would never be able to make objective statements.
So, I think when he says that somebody says something is objective, is just to say that they said that it is universal necessary, not that it is universal necessary. Now, whether it's true or not, he hasn't really dealt with that yet, I don't think.
It seems that this is all framework.
Yes, which is how
foundation.
So which is to say that if we are to say something that is true, we have to say that on the one hand that it is objective, and what does it mean for it to be objective? Which is to say that it applies to the object, which is to say that it applies universally necessarily. Now, false things can also be said with respect to the object, but all cases of truth statements are objective. Yeah, which has to do with his transcendental logic here, which is that we're just going to assume for the start of it that pure natural science is possible. Sorry, I'm just gonna grab the reins here.
Take your time.
Yep. So we have the main question of this section is how is pure natural science possible? And now we're gonna do our transcendental logic up to the explanation, which is that pure natural science is possible by way of cognition of nature a priori, which is another way of saying, which is in a similar way, you're saying that you are having cognizance of the necessary conformity of objects to laws. And then you go, well, how do we have cognition of nature a priori? And then he has a couple different wordings of that. And he equates the two later ones. So you can equate that second question to how is it possible to cognize the a priori, or how is it possible to cognize a priori the necessary conformity to law of things as objects of experience? That question is more or less equal to saying how is it possible to cognize the necessary conformity to law of experience itself. So we're now saying that the a priori conditions of the possibility of experience are the same as the sources out of which all universal laws of nature must be derived. And we get the answer to the second question is how do we cognize nature a priori? The way that we do that is by processing the objects of intuition using pure understanding. And then more or less, how is the processing of perceptions or objects of intuition with pure understanding possible? Well, we do it by means of the pure concepts of the understanding.
Pure concepts of the understanding.
Yeah, and pure concepts. So you can have concepts that aren't pure, but they're still done by the understanding, which is why. So judgments of perceptions are still done by the understanding, but they rely upon concepts that come from intuition, or that are mixed with intuition. Whereas when you're taking pure concepts of the understanding, you're intermixing things that don't come from intuition, but they come from the understanding. And according to him, that's what ends up making them objective, as in they rely they don't point to our sensibility, but they point to the objects themselves, and that makes them objective.
All right. I don't have. It's a lot to chew on. Give me a second.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, in this instance, when we're talking about a priori judgments or intuitions, can you define that?
So intuitions
And the sensibility, I think, is tied into that.
Yes, sensibility is definitely tied into intuition. So an intuition is, excuse me. So really, in a lot of ways, intuitions is more or less the same as sensibility, in the sense that just intuition is okay. So because you have forms of intuition and you have forms of sensibility. So like the forms of sensibility are space and time, and space and time are the pure intuitions that we get. I think really the only thing that intuition is a way of wording that makes it more tied to our brains, whereas sensibility tells us that it's connected to the tells us that we're connected to the objects. the thing is that we can have. So I don't think we can have pure sensibility. Well, we can have the forms. So the forms of sensibility are pure intuitions, which is that they are intuitive. That there are things that can be made into concepts that don't rely upon either empirical states of
It's a
affairs.
gut, like you would say, a gut feeling almost.
Yes, very much a gut feeling that it just kind of appears to you that way, and it appears to you not that it's physical, but that it just sort of makes sense.
It's like that. Oh, we covered this last time, right? The math, like 2 plus 2,
Mm-hmm.
a priori, right, is to say that like you're not going to be able to argue me off of 2 plus 2 is something else than 4.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And so, and in a lot of ways, like even this table I'm looking at, for example, it just makes sense to me. There's a table there. Okay, it's just right
It was
there.
so rapey the way you said that.
What?
This table.
This table.
It's well, not rapey. I should say sexual. You were very sexually objectifying that table.
I mean, it's a good looking table.
It's a nice fucking. I gotta say, it is a nice table.
It's firm.
It's not as
Skinny.
nice as your server rec, but we're getting
No,
off the point.
it's not as good as my server rack. But my server rack serves me well. I don't have to objectify it. It does it itself. Anyway, okay, so yeah, so when we're talking about like so how's how is pure natural science possible? We end up dealing with that before we ever actually do. Okay, so what kind of bothers me is that in pure natural science, you end up applying mathematics, which presumably mathematics is presumably a priori, and you're applying it to empirical items. Um,
What is that? What about that is? I can
which
guess,
is that
but
like, well, on the one hand, like how like, so the way that you end up. So what bothers me about it is I'm not just on the one hand just fathoming mathematics and then being like, oh, I've discovered all of this stuff, and now I'm gonna start applying it to physical things. I mean, maybe it's a story of causality, which is that, oh, I'm seeing all these physical things, and now I'm trying to figure out how is it possible that these physical things happen. Um, like they didn't like Newton and Leibniz didn't just make up calculus for the shit of it. They were looking at certain things. At least I'm guessing here. They were just looking at things and they're trying to figure out how to, put certain things together, and then they came up with calculus, and it happened to work very well. Similarly, like when people were trying to figure out like the laws of gravitation, they weren't just doing random ass shit and going, well, there's a weird notion that F equals G times M divided by R squared. No, they were looking at actual things in the world, and they were abstracting particularly quantities of those, which was that you had mass and distance, and presumably force, which then affected the speeds of things. And then they were able to, and then from experience they were able to abstract
like nothing outside of the
mathematics.
moon we actually know exists, right? Everything is some
Well,
like black holes, dark matter. All of
well,
these things are theoretical. Is
the
that
way
what you're
that
getting at,
Kant
or
is
am I?
making it seem like is that pure natural science is done first, and then you apply it to actual things. Whereas the story of science actually tells us that we looked at stuff, and then we went, how is that possible? And then we thought about it, and then we came up with stuff, we fathomed it, and then we applied it back to the actual things. Um,
Wait. Reiterate.
yeah.
Can't believe which one of those two.
So the sentiment I get from Kant is that we start from our head, we fathom a bunch of mathematics, and then we can apply it to empirical objects. Like actually fully given objects, not possible objects, actually given objects. Whereas the historical account of science says we saw a bunch of empirical objects, we tried to make sense of them, that caused us to make up a mathematics, and then we went back to the objects. So we didn't start in our head and then before we even looked at stuff, we went and then we discovered mathematics and then we went into things. No. The history of science tells us that we actually looked at stuff first and then we went into our head and then that went back to the world as opposed to from our head to the world.
So let me ask you a question, and it's directly related, and this is gonna clarify. Or I'm gonna make a statement first. I would say our curiosity comes from looking at the objective world, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I would say maybe back then, right? Many assumptions had to be made to navigate the world that we had no information about. That we then what is it called when you fucking bullshit? Like you start with a conclusion and work your way backwards. You're like, this sounds like this, so I'm gonna look at the math and make the math work, right? It's like a biased reading of statistics, right? I maybe it's a time period or temporal. Back then, that was more likely to happen. But I would say he's not disagreeing that natural science exists and is valid, is he? I don't like that breath.
No. So what I don't like is the notion of pure natural science. That part I don't like. Because
in and of itself, or
yes,
his opinion on it.
The notion of itself and his opinion of it. Only because the only notion I have of it is his opinion of it. So.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. Which is that it seems like he's making a story where at first we already had pure natural science, and then we started coming up with laws. So I'm gonna also just disagree with myself on the fly of it. Which is that before we could even start understanding that things were put together, we had to understand something certain, which was, if we're going to come back to Schopenhauer, the principle of sufficient reason, which is that for anything there is a reason. Before I could even make sense of the world that's going on, the first thing I had to assume, which couldn't have ever come from experience, was that something caused something else to happen. That there was a reason for things to come from. And there's no way I could have gotten that from experience, because if I got it from experience, then I would have,
it defeats itself. It's a self-defeater.
I couldn't have gotten it from experience, because the only way that I would, it's kind of hard to explain why I wouldn't be able to get it from experience. Anyway.
Moving on.
Yeah. It sounds like, I guess his sentiment, what I feel like he wants to say is that pure natural science includes Newtonian physics. Woo! Which is not very good. I don't like that. I mean, he says himself that when he's talking about pure natural science, he's mostly talking about physical science and not psychological stuff, because for whatever reason, I don't know. I'm just rambling now. What do you think, Sasha?
So a lot of this is beyond my education, right? Essentially, I read through it. I'll tell you if I don't read and I just read the Spark Notes. I did read through or listen through the whole thing. And then the section that interests me is the one that I pulled the Spark Notes from. But when I did a Spark Note check to get, people like Kant, I have to fucking check myself to, because it's like one word. You'll hear me. I'll come with like one word of understanding. Like I think one word is defined one way, and butterfly effect ruins any sort of interpretation I have about the section. So all of that to say is that when he started talking, essentially it summed up that it said that natural science, and he's kind of making the case for or against it. And I just totally, it's not natural science, but the modern science, conceptually or contemporarily how we understand science. And I'm like, well, it didn't get my jimmies going, so I didn't spend time oodling about it.
Sure.
But I hear what you're saying about the difference is there and a priori. But again, all of this is framework. It's not like he's not making any concrete statements or frameworks. Well, if we're not in that sense, but like he's not making statements, I would say, that are uh, agree or disagreeable.
Yeah,
So I didn't grip into it.
He's not trying to assert facts.
Yeah, he's laying groundwork for future discussion in the book, and or future discussion, and
Yeah,
so
he's talking about how it is possible that we can talk about facts.
it's like when me and someone who agrees with me talk. I don't like, I fall asleep. Like the yeah, like because he's laying a framework, I'm just along for the ride, so I don't really have much to say. It's
Right.
it's just like cool, you know. It's not that I didn't find it interesting. It's just like I can't disagree or agree. I think there's something there, right? But it either requires further exploration or writing, which we'll get
Well,
with time.
the fun part that a lot of people have had problems with Kant and is the notion of the thing itself, which is that he's going to constantly make reference to it. Because most of the time when people are talking about objects, they want to say something about objects in themselves. Or, when you're talking about the laws, you're talking about the laws of things in themselves, not as they appear to me. And that the whole time he's constantly going, oh, actually, objects in themselves, we can't say anything about them. We can't say, all the laws that we're talking about are actually laws of appearances and not laws of objects in themselves.
I've heard that, right? The discussion of the thing itself,
Yeah.
which is isn't that all the way back to Platonian Socratic idea, or is it a
I wouldn't say Socrates, but Plato's notion of the thing in itself is very different from the notion of like quote unquote early modern philosophy's notion of the thing in itself.
Okay.
Which is that the thing in itself. Well, so what? Okay. So
it's the same words in that order, just to mean different meanings.
Yeah, they kind of mean something different. The thing, so it's the thing in itself is the thing that exists separate from the human mind, and in Plato, that's going to be the Platonic ideas. They're going to be the things that actually determine what objects, like what things are in the world. They determine them. So things that are Platonic objects are things such as the good, and the good is the type of thing that determines everything else. And something like green, there's a Platonic idea of green, and a Platonic idea of triangle, whatever. And they are the things that exist separately from humans perceiving them, and they exist separately from particularly things existing as those things. Whereas you get something like I don't know. I'm not going to point to anybody in particular, but it's not too hard to grasp the fact that
do it, pussy.
Well, I can't. I don't actually know which people say this, but yeah, which is, but it's not. It's not too hard to
refraining from talking shit.
No,
I was like, let's
go. I'm not avoiding talking shit. It's just I don't even know who I'm talking shit about. But it's just the notion that this chair here does exist when I'm not here because there's some kind of material substance, and it's a particular. It's not universal. So that's the thing is that the Platonic objects are universals, whereas most of the time when people are talking about the thing in themselves, does the tree make a sound when it falls in the forest without anybody to hear it? Does it really make a sound? Like the thing itself, like it exists separately from us and it exists when we're not looking at it. Like chair there, we have a notion of persistence.
So that goes back to idealism versus.
Yes. So which is that idealism says that there's no things that exist without somebody perceiving them, whereas Kant's gonna keep to the point that there definitely are things that exist without us perceiving them. And right after that, he's also going to say that the things that we don't know anything about them, we can't perceive them, we can't talk about them, those things cause the sensations that produce the intuitions that produce our experiences. Which is one problem a lot of people are going to have, which is that, well, at least in Schopenhauer's world, is that on the one hand, it's like we're using the notion of causality, or on the one hand, we're talking about objects of experience, which is the consequent of the antecedent of a thing that we can't talk about at all. And so that's just, I think Schopenhauer is going to end up saying that Kant misuses the notion of causality.
You cut out. Misuses.
That Schopenhauer is going to say that Kant misuses the notion of causality. Insofar as Kant says that things in themselves, of which we have no knowledge of, cause the sensations that produce the objects of our experience.
All right, I'm going to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
I hit the weed about 15 minutes ago, and
Okay.
I'm getting lost.
That's fine. I think I've been drunk this whole time.
No. I can tell you're making sense. As far as my ability to follow, it's slowly diminishing.
All right, that's fair.
And I think it'd be good next time. We need to start with the more complex ideas. I think I went for the easy comfort food,
Sure.
and as we get 2.5 hours in, the hitting Kant is going to be a little harder.
Sure.
But I'll say this: there's now I don't know how much this topic's going to interest you, but it's in this realm. So something that has been going around the kind of the debate sphere, as it's not so eloquently called, is the topic of a woman's ability to choose. Uh, uh, how can I put this? Porn, right? The woman as an object, right? Is it bad to be objectified? And how OnlyFans has changed the porn game, right? And now women who never would have done porn are like talking about how porn is damaging them so badly. And there's this new like super like fourth wave feminist. Like men are inherently evil via their objectification of the human. So I've got a video on that.
Yeah.
That'll be more of a kind of casual out to this conversation.
That's fine.
And it's from a philosopher, a PhD in philosophy is going to be giving the arguments.
All right. Well, I'm gonna. Yep. Let's watch it.